Hey everyone, Tactics here with another installment of my Season 2 Mythic Plus Guide series, where this time I'll be diving into ULDAMAN Legacy of Tyr, discussing important interrupts, abilities to watch out for, boss mechanics, and much more. I'll be covering a simple pug-friendly route at the end of the video as well that will be useful for the beginning of the season, and I'll post the MDT link down in the description below if you want to import it for yourself. Several dungeon guides just like this one are already out on my channel and down in the description below, with the rest coming out very soon, and once that's done, I'll be posting advanced guides for all 8 dungeons showing off tips and tricks for timing them on higher key levels. So if that sounds like something you want to watch, be sure you subscribe to the channel and click on that notification bell so you know when they go live. Otherwise, let's go through the dungeon itself, starting with the trash that you'll face on your way to the first boss. In this area are a bunch of different trogs. The first and least dangerous are these scavenging leapers. These guys have a single ability in ambush, and they will just leap towards a random target, dealing AoE damage in a small 4-yard radius, so just make sure you avoid those. Stone Vault Geomancers are also in this area, and they have 2 castable abilities, both of which are interruptible. The first is Stone Spike, which is just a tank targeted nature hit, so kick as many of these as you can to reduce your tank damage. And the second is Chain Lightning, which is a nature hit that will also cleave to 3 nearby allies. This spell is also stoppable, so I recommend using a kick or a stop on this, as it is a bunch of extra AoE damage. Hulking Berserkers are a lieutenant mob in this area, meaning they can't be CC'd. They have a tank hit in Diseased Bite, which, as expected, puts a disease on the tank, though this is just a 30% slow, so it's really not a big deal if you don't have a disease dispel for it. They also have a Brutal Slam AoE, which just cleaves anyone within 7 yards of the Berserker after a few seconds and stuns them for a second and a half, so make sure you get out of this. Finally, they have Reckless Rage, which will enrage all of the allies they have within 20 yards, giving them a 20% increase of damage done and taken and rage debuff, so it can be soothed off if you need it to be, but also this is kind of a DPS increase if you're able to keep it on them. Know that this will always cast when the Berserker hits 40% HP, so it's kind of deterministic and you know when this damage spike is going to come out. The scariest mobs in this area for your tank are going to be the Vicious Basilisks. These guys have a tank hit that has a stacking physical dot in Chomp. Quite scary for sure, especially if you find yourself at high stacks when that Berserker enrages the Basilisk, as that dot will not be affected if you de-enrage the Basilisk, so you're going to be taking that extra damage the whole time. They also have a cast that you can interrupt or stop in Spiked Carapace, which is a magic buff that will deal nature damage to anyone who attacks the Basilisk. Luckily, again, this can be purged in case you do miss that interrupt or stop. Moving into a side room past the Trogs and Basilisks, you'll find the Lost Dwarves, a familiar trio that you will be fighting all at the same time. You've got Eric the Swift, who deals random damage to individual players with his dagger throw, and will occasionally charge to a random player using Skullcracker, which will deal physical damage and disorient anyone within 5 yards of the impact for 3 seconds. Olaf also has a random target ability in Ricocheting Shield. This deals physical damage to a random player and then anyone else within 5 yards of them after a delay, so make sure you're away from your group. In addition, he will sometimes jump to a random dwarf, protecting them with an interruptible cast in Defensive Bulwark, which reduces their damage taken by 75% for 12 seconds, or until you kick that cast. Finally, Balog has a couple frontals to be aware of. His first is Heavy Arrow. This is a line attack that he powers up directly in front of him, and it deals physical damage and knocks back anyone hit. And then he also has Wild Cleave, yet another physical hit here that will slash anyone within 10 yards of the front of the boss. Throughout the fight, and also whenever a dwarf hits 10% HP, they will jump up into their longboat and begin shooting off searing cannon fire at players, and this will knock back players, leaving a nasty fire magic dot if you are hit by these swirlies, and it also leaves behind a burning pitch puddle that deals heavy ticking damage for 30 seconds. On top of this, the bolt will also pulse for party-wide fire damage with each shot, and it will shoot faster for each dwarf currently in the boat. Once you bring all 3 dwarves to 10%, they surrender and you can move through some familiar Trog and Basilisk enemies towards the second boss. There is one new Trog mob in this area called the Burly Rock Throwers, and as expected, these guys have an ability called Throw Rock, which is just a random target swirly that you want to avoid. So you can either avoid that, you can also stop it as well, but honestly, not a super high priority stop, especially with some of the mobs we've mentioned earlier. After clearing out all of the remaining Trogs, you'll reach Bromach, who will intermittently call Trogs to join him in combat, summoning 3 ambushers that will leap at random players, just like the leapers from before, as well as 1 Geomancer, which again is just exactly like the previously encountered mobs, got a both Stone Spike and a Chain Lightning interruptible cast. You want to make sure that you keep on top of how many of these mobs are up, as eventually Bromach will cast Bloodlust to empower both himself and any living Trog adds, and this will increase their haste by 30% for 20 seconds, so it's easy to get overwhelmed here. To help with this, Bromach will also spawn a Quaking Totem between each wave of Trogs, and while this does a pretty significant amount of party damage every 2 seconds, you can also use it in your favor, as when you destroy the totem, it will tremor out, stunning any Trogs within 8 yards of the totem, and causing them to take 200% increased damage for 10 seconds, and this does include Bromach himself. The goal here is to group up all the Trogs on top of the boss and go on to wherever this totem spawns. You focus down the totem ASAP, and then that allows you to just cleave off of Bromach himself onto the damage amped smaller Trogs and not lose any boss damage, while also clearing the adds out in a timely manner. Outside of this, the boss will occasionally use Thundering Slam around himself, dealing heavy nature damage to players that are within 12 yards of him, so make sure you just run out when this happens. Once you've defeated Bromach, the door ahead will open, revealing several earthen mobs. The first is an earthen custodian. These guys are quite simple. They just have a cleave attack in front of them, 3 yards in front of them towards the tank, and this is stoppable in case you ever find yourself accidentally in front of them for whatever reason. Crafty custodians are also in this area, and these guys get a stacking 12-second long 10% haste and damage done increase in ancient power, and the way to get rid of this is actually to stun them. This will cause systemic vulnerability, removing any of those ancient power stacks, and also causing them to take 50% increased damage for 6 seconds. So you really want to make sure that you don't let these guys stack up too high, and you don't stun DR them too much as well, as that damage amp can be very, very dangerous for your tank with their third ability, Jagged Bite, which is just a physical tank hit and pretty nasty bleed on them as well, especially if there's multiple custodians. This will stack up. What you can do though as a tank is you can backstep slightly. This won't cancel the cast, but it will make the cast finish but not go on you, and you continuously backstep this cast, backstep this cast, backstep this cast. If anyone's familiar with the Matriarch mob from Temple of the Jade Serpent in Season 1, it's exactly like that mob's Beak Slash or whatever it was called. Basically the exact same thing, big physical hit with a bleed that you can backstep that doesn't cancel it, but won't make it hit you. Just before the next boss, you'll find some Earthen Weavers as well. Similar to before, they have an interruptible cast in Stone Bolt. This is again tank targeted, nature hit, and they also have a channeled of AoE in Hail of Stone. This is nature damage in within 40 yards. It's not kickable, so you need to make sure that you stop this. Making your way through this area, you'll reach Sentinel Talondras, which is a pretty straightforward but interesting boss fight, as she is actually stunnable, unlike pretty much every other boss mob in the game. How this works is the boss starts with 2 stacks of Inexorable, causing stuns against her to eat a stack of that instead of stun her. You can break through these stacks in a couple of ways. The first is to, of course, just use your own stuns against her, right? Kidney Shot, Podge, anything you have will reduce a stack by 1. Alternatively, you can use the resonating orbs spawned by the boss instead, which are spawned both on players and randomly throughout the room 3 at a time, and these will just leave behind a little mine that will stun whoever touches it for 6 seconds. Whether that's a player or the boss, doesn't matter, so you're able to kite Talondras through these in order to take away inexorable stacks as well. Once you actually do stun, Talondras will take additional damage for a few seconds, and then she'll regain 2 inexorable stacks and begin fighting once again. Now, while you may think you should just constantly keep her stunned, of course, Blizzard has thought of this, and they've implemented a buff called Unrelenting, which basically means that every time she gets stunned, she deals 5% additional damage. Now on the flip side, you do want to make sure that you are stunning her relatively consistently, as when Talondras reaches 100 energy, she'll begin to cast Titanic Empowerment, which makes her immune to crowd control and causes her to deal 50% additional damage for 40 seconds. So it's a balance here between stunning her often enough that she will never get empowered, but not stunning her so often that you get overwhelmed by her other abilities dealing too much damage. In terms of what those abilities are, she will bleed a random player with Earthen Shards, dealing initial physical damage and then an additional dot over 10 seconds. Then she also has a party hit in Crushing Stomp that deals physical damage and also knocks all players back. So make sure that you're positioned in such a way that you won't get knocked into any of those stunning orbs we discussed earlier. Once you've defeated the Sentinel, there's a few additional types of mobs between you and the next boss. There are more Earthen, of course. You've got the Earthen Warder in this area. These guys have a couple spells, both of which can be either kicked or stopped. The first is Earthen Ward. This is a magic shield that goes up on a random ally. So of course, on top of the kick and stop, you can also purge this. Second is Curse of Stone, and like the name entails, this is also a curse effect, so it can be dispelled if you have a curse spell. This will slow whoever it's on and stun them upon expiration, so you want to make sure you either stop this cast entirely with an interrupt or a C, or you have a curse spell available to you, otherwise people are going to get stunned. Runic Protectors are also in this area. These golems have a couple abilities. The first is Fissuring Slam. This is a nature tank hit that will also spawn puddles beneath every single player within 40 yards. And if you stand in these puddles, you will be taking 50% additional damage. So you really want to make sure you move out of these, because immediately following the Fissuring Slam cast, the Protector will start to channel Earthquake, which is just AoE damage over 6 seconds. You can't stop it in any way. You can, however, LOS it around corners or pillars if you so choose, but if you can live the damage otherwise, obviously stay outside, continue doing damage to the pack. Just again, try not to stand in any of the puddles from the Fissuring Slam, and that goes double for tanks. You don't want to be taking extra damage because you forgot to move out of a puddle. A couple beasts are also in the area. You've got the Skittering Crawlers and their Venomous Fangs, which causes their melees to have a chance to put a stacking poison on whoever they're hitting. They also have a Pounce attack, which is a stoppable ability that will just cause the mob to jump to a random target and deal a bunch of physical damage. Haven Seekers are the bats in this area. These guys have a single spell in Sonic Burst that you will want to make sure you interrupt or stop, as it is a 45-yard range physical hit, along with a 4-second silence, which can be pretty nasty. Getting past the beasts here, you'll be able to interact with a nearby door, which opens up into a massive round room that houses Emberon. On engaging the golem, he will activate 4 of the dormant keepers surrounding the room, which causes them to periodically shoot out seeking flame orbs aimed at random players that deal extremely heavy fire damage if they manage to hit you, so avoid these at all costs, especially when the boss is casting Unstable Embers, as this will put a 7-yard circle around every single player and then deal a large fire hit to them and anyone else inside of that 7-yard circle after 3 seconds. If you ever eat an orb around the same time as its detonation, there's a good chance that you're just dead. On top of that, Emberon also has a tank frontal in Searing Clap, which not only does fire damage to the tank and anyone else in the cone, but also puts a 10-second fire magic dot on the entire party, regardless of where you are in the room, so there's a lot of party damage going out in this phase. When Emberon gets to full energy, he'll run towards the middle of the room, throw up a barrier around himself that will damage and knock back players that come into contact with it, and then begin channeling Purging Flames, a massive beam that rotates around the room in a clockwise direction, dealing lethal damage to players that try to pass through it. You'll also be taking constant ticking fire damage during this phase from Fire Wave, which pulses every 3 seconds. In order to get out of this Death Beam phase, you'll need to kill the 4 now attackable keepers that were activated at the start of the fight. We found the best strategy to position yourself as a group behind where the beam begins to spawn, which allows you to stay as a group for healing and also gives you more time when you're crunched by the beam coming from behind you. The most important thing for sure though is staying together as a group, so regardless of where you go, make sure you're together. Once you defeat the 4 keepers, this phase will end and the boss will become attackable again. Up 4 new keepers, and then the fight just repeats from there. Past Emberon, there is yet another Golem and yet another Earthern. The Golems here are called Ebonstone Golems, and these guys only have a single ability in Thunderous Clap. Unlike the Earthquake from the previous Golems, this is an immediate 1 tick of damage that deals nature hits to anyone within 60 yards of the mob, and it can also be LOS, so again, use the corners, use the pillars to your advantage here. This is just an individual hit, so you don't need to be away from the action for a long period of time, and especially in some of the pulls with multiple of these guys, it can definitely be worthwhile to group them up near a corner and just pop out of line of sight whenever this Thunderous Clap goes off to completely mitigate the damage. Earthen Guardian here has a couple abilities as well. Bulwark Slam, just a physical tank hit, nothing too scary to deal with there. More importantly though is Blessing of Tyr, and this is a channeled area that'll go up around the mob that will give any allies in it a 20% damage increase, but any players will be taking constant ticking damage every half second. So you want to pull everything out of that circle and make sure that you aren't standing in it yourself. Eventually you'll get to the Infinite Dragonflight Incursion, and there are a couple mobs in this area. The Infinite Agent have a ability called Time Blade. This is a physical tank hit again, and just a 50% slow, so the slow is quite significant, but it's not too dangerous. The cast is quick, but it is stoppable, but again, not too dangerous here. Your tank's going to be a little slow if you let it go off. Agents also have the ability called Hasten. This is both interruptible and stoppable, and also is a magic buff that will give them 30% hasten speed for 12 seconds. So if you have something like a mage that can steal that magic buff, it can be pretty nice. The dangerous mobs in this area are the Infinite Time Reavers. These guys put a stacking magic debuff on the entire group called Stolen Time, and basically what this does is it applies a stacking dot and 2% haste reduction to all players within 30 yards. Also can be LOS though, so again, corners here are your best friend. It refreshes around 1 second left on the dot, so if you just go behind when you're at high stacks, you can wait out your debuff, it'll expire, and then you can go back up with all your haste and that reduced dot before stacking back up again. Of course, Master Spell also does wonders in the area, so it's looking like a pretty nice priest dungeon for sure. There are also some whelps in this area, but they don't really do anything of note. Leading the Infinite Dragonflight expedition here is the final boss, Chrono-Lord Deios. Constantly throughout this fight, the boss will be calling down Eternity Orbs, which fall from above and deal a small tick of raid damage, and leave behind an Eternity Zone when they actually touch the ground. These Eternity Zones are basically large puddles that deal ticking arcane damage every second you're inside of them, and they will also reduce your haste by a whopping 30%, so you really want to make sure you avoid them. On top of this, the puddles do grow over time, resulting in more and more area denial as you get deeper into the encounter. To help with this, Deios will cast Rewind Time Flow when he reaches 0 energy, and this will deal ticking damage over 12 seconds while he refills his energy bar, but it also causes the orbs that we just mentioned to flow upwards instead of down, and it causes the temporal zones to shrink and also increase player haste by 50% instead of stealing it. You really make sure you want to get into them when this happens to use that damage buff to your advantage. In terms of other abilities you'll need to deal with, there is of course a breath attack. It's a dragon. This is called Sand Breath, just arcane damage to the tank and anyone else in the cone, as well as a party-wide arcane hit called Wing Buffet, which will also knock back all players, so be aware of that. The final ability of Deios has is Time Sync, which is a magic debuff that will go out on 3 players, slowing them by 35% and dealing ticking damage every 9 seconds. And then at the end, when it actually expires, it'll spawn a Time Eruption swirly underneath the player, and this will deal additional arcane damage to anyone that gets hit by it, on top of also knocking them back. Note that this is considered a snare on top of being a magic debuff, so things like Freedom, Avatar, Tiger's Lust, Master Spell, all of these abilities work on these dots to just mitigate that ticking damage. And also, of course, it spawns those swirlies a little early whenever you do this, so just be aware of them. Don't be inside of them when they actually detonate. That's it for the dungeon itself, so let's go into the route. A reminder here, the goal is to make this as pug friendly as possible. I've avoided things like skips, like large pulls. Feel free to adjust this as you see fit, depending on how confident your group is in this dungeon. So starting off the bat here, we've got a bunch of leapers. These guys are quite weak, so we pull a lot of them. Really the only mobs that are relevant are the 1 Berserker, the 1 Basilisk, and the 1 Geomancer in this first pull. Similarly here, we just want to pull these 2 packs together because it's 2 mobs and then 3 mobs. Just combine that. Same thing over here, 2 mobs, 3 mobs. Then you've got the dwarves over there, and you can finally move out towards Bromach. This pull could totally be combined as well. The rock throwers aren't too scary. This would basically just be a double Geomancer, double Basilisk pull again. So definitely combinable if you are feeling like you're comfortable. Otherwise, just do a 1x1. Got a Geomancer and a double Berserker there before the boss. And this opens up to the next area. I've tried to avoid skips here, so this pole kind of looks bigger than it is. It's quite a long distance. Basically, what you can do is you can pull these 4 mobs together, and then, as I mentioned in the mob ability section, you want to be slowly backstepping when the custodians try and cast the bleed on the tank. And you can basically backstep your way all the way down here to the custodian down here, pull him into the pack, and then, you know, leave them all down. Eventually, you can either run all the way through to the boss with this custodian or just kill him out here. These guys stay at the edge. You just work your way down the middle here. Just run straight through. It'll be fine. But if you do accidentally pull these, not a big deal. Just make sure you kill them before you do the boss. Then again, boss number 3 over here, making our way through a couple double pulls of earthen. Not a biggest deal here because they're not too dangerous. You mostly just want to make sure you keep on top of like AoE stopping them so you don't get overwhelmed by any of the potential weaver damage, which I believe there are a couple in this pack. Don't worry about them. Same deal. Double pull here just to pull things together. If you're a little worried, you could do like a 3 pull, and then you could do the 4 and 2 instead of the 4 and 3 and the 2 and 5. Something you could do there. Then you make your way, and you've got your runic protector with 4 dwarves here. All your beasties in this area, there's not too many of them, so I just run in, pull them all. And then you've got Emberon, and then we can move downstairs to the lower area. Again, a few pulls. There's one guy in the corner. We just walk past him. Pulls. If you're feeling real brave, you could add the 2 Ebonstone Golems to this pull and then use some of the stairs here or pillars to LOS the actual Ebonstone cast. But again, I've left that out in this specific route, but that's something you can definitely do. Same thing here. There's pillars all around this room to LOS these golems. You can do, technically, you could definitely double pull in this area if you're feeling brave. Making your way over here. Make sure you use your corners to LOS the Time Reaver before their dot gets too big, too high, if you don't have enough magic dispels like a priest, for example. Use these corners all in this area to your advantage, right? This pink pull it back to like right here, like where my mouse is. Hang them there, and you can use this wall to LOS. Same deal. Pull these guys, same spot, right here. Use this to LOS. There's 2 Time Reavers in this pull, so that's very, very scary. Make sure you are clearing your dot a fair bit because it will stack up twice as fast. And there we just have the last boss. So there we go. That video is wrapped up. Hopefully you found the guide useful, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it. As I mentioned, I'll have guide videos for all 8 Season 2 dungeons out shortly, and once the season actually starts, I'll be posting advanced guides for every single dungeon, going over tips and tricks for how to time them on higher key levels, so make sure you stick around and are on the lookout for those. If you have any questions about this dungeon, feel free to drop them down in the comments below, or come stop by my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I stream high key pushing and mythic raiding from a tank POV. I'll be more than happy to help you out over there. As always, massive thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon. I appreciate everything you guys do. Thank you so much. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.